Greetings to all Africans around the world. I am Akosua Prempeh, broadcasting from the United States of Africa. Tonight, we bring you an important report from Ouagadougou, where Burkina Faso has concluded its first dialogue days on defense, security, finance, and diplomacy. This high-level gathering brought together key government leaders to strengthen coordination between national defense, foreign policy, and economic strategy in a rapidly changing global order. At a time when global power structures are shifting and nations of the global south are redefining their sovereignty, Burkina Faso is presenting a new strategic vision, one built on unity, coordination, and self-reliance. Leaders emphasize that diplomacy must open doors, defense must protect the nation, and the economy must finance sovereignty. Together, these pillars form the foundation of national strength. The discussions also addressed international perception, economic independence, resource control, and the fight against misinformation. The central message was clear: sovereignty is not simply declared. It must be organized, defended, and sustained through coordinated national effort. Before we go into the full report, I encourage you to subscribe to the United States of Africa, like this video, and share it on your WhatsApp groups, Telegram channels, Facebook pages, and across all social media platforms. Let us connect Africans everywhere and strengthen continental unity. Your engagement helps build a powerful African voice. Stay with us as we bring you the full details.
Ensuring the sovereignty of Burkina Faso and its interest in a global context of major security challenges and geopolitical reconfiguration. These days are therefore intended to be a framework for harmonizing the reading and understanding of regional and international geopolitics and geostrategy, with a view to a more coherent and effective implementation of Burkina Faso's foreign policy, while fostering a culture of collaboration and sharing of expertise within the public administration, diplomacy and geopolitical and security context, synergy for an optimization of defense and the protection of national interests. We are talking about it during this high-level panel. And with the effective presence of the Minister of State, Minister of War and Patriotic Defense, Major General Celestin Simpore. We are also talking about it with Karamoko. Jean-Marie Traoré, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and finally, Aboubacar Nakanabo, Minister of Economy and Finance. Good evening, ministers. Thank you for your presence at this high-level panel and for sharing with the audience and viewers your analysis on the theme of these days of dialogue, defense, security, finance, and diplomacy. Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs, we start with you. So how is Burkinabe diplomacy doing?
Thank you, Madam. I would like, before giving elements of response to this question, to tell you again our satisfaction to see this framework being held, which comes in response to a concern, which is that of being able to reduce the barriers as best as possible between the ministerial entities and all the institutions that contribute to the implementation of Burkina Faso's foreign policy. We often have the impression of knowing each other. We rub shoulders. We normally contribute to the achievement of the same objectives. It is when we find ourselves around the table that we realize that there are quite a few nuances to be cleared up to understand each other better. I think that this framework comes as a response, as an alternative to this situation. That said, I would say that Burkinabe diplomacy is doing well. It tries to adapt to the issues of the moment, volatile issues, but it tries to follow the rhythms under the enlightened orientations of the President of Faso, Comrade Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and on the markers that have been set in the context of our mission.
So, Mr. Minister of State, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has indicated it. Dialogue, mutual knowledge is the objective behind these days of dialogue. What is your view on the organization of these days?
Thank you very much. As the Minister of Foreign Affairs so aptly put it, this meeting framework should have been established long ago. Because when it comes to diplomacy, there are several facets. there is civil diplomacy, and there is also military diplomacy. And in diplomatic circles, we have several actors who find themselves in the same place and who must work together to achieve the same objectives, which is the influence of the country, Burkina Faso, through all the actions and all the acts they must perform. And these acts must be concerted and taken in common agreement with the ambassador who oversees all this personnel at the external diplomatic level. So, in any case, we welcome this meeting and we are pleased to have been able to organize it. And our wish is that it can continue at all times every year so that diplomatic actors can find each other and meet. And I once again welcome the presence of the young people, the trainees from the Staff College of the Tiefo Amoro Institute, and also those from the ENI who are currently here and who are in fact our future actors in Burkina's diplomacy, whether military or civil. And our wish is that next time we can also involve the young people from the school, the Public Finance Institute, who are also actors who could have been here, but since it's the first time, well, every beginning has its difficulties, and that is part of our difficulties.
So, Mr. Nakanabo, Minister Nakanabo, I assume you share the Minister of State's opinion on the necessity of these days.
Absolutely. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for having initiated these days of reflection and exchange. I think that, as he said, we rub shoulders, but each is often in their own field when in reality the interdependence is obvious. As the Minister of State said, there is civil diplomacy, military diplomacy, but when we go into civil diplomacy, we can also dissect it to bring out political diplomacy, economic diplomacy. So inevitably we find ourselves together, and I think there is like a kind of virtuous circle where when we are in a situation where there is security, it creates confidence. And when there is confidence, it attracts investors. And when investors come, it creates growth. And when there is growth, it creates development and stability, and that allows the country's voice to be heard. So as a result, when we look at all these three pillars, each pillar naturally contributes to the development of the other, which means it's obvious that we must work together to be able to achieve the objectives. But this virtuous circle can become a vicious circle if indeed there is not good coordination. Because first of all, when there is insecurity, naturally, investors flee, capital flees, and so as a result, we are in a situation where there is no growth, we create poverty and instability. And when you are unstable, naturally, you cannot carry weight on the diplomatic stage. So I believe there is truly an interdependence in that sense. I can only welcome these sessions that are currently taking place.
So with the stage set, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs, the observed geopolitical dynamics tend to show a West being marginalized by a global South that is becoming aware of its strengths and organizing to achieve its emancipation. In Burkina Faso, the reclaiming of full and complete sovereignty is a popular aspiration. As is known, it is led by the Comrade President, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. How does Burkinabe diplomacy intend to proceed to better benefit from this dynamic internationally?
Very well, thank you, ma'am. I think that already this framework is one of the instruments for implementing this vision. We are trying at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to ensure that all the energy we deploy goes toward reclaiming true sovereignty. This starts with internal restructuring and reclaiming our resources, as the Minister of Economy and Finance said. It is a bit like a sparkling object that must be seen from thousands of miles away. That is how I perceive it. To shine internationally, you must first have an attractive internal configuration. And to have an attractive internal configuration, you must work on a certain number of levers. In terms of diplomacy, we are trying, under the guidelines provided, to work on these issues. It is about working to optimize resource mobilization through the diversification of partners. When you look at current diplomatic writing, there is a reorientation with more and more space given to other partners. There is the optimization of the diaspora's role in what we do with the High Council of Burkinabe abroad, but also a permanent effort of dialogue with Burkinabe living abroad. So we are trying to work on a certain number of levers that will allow the country to optimize its own capacities. And that is important because sovereignty, we can certainly claim it, but to truly feel it, we must give ourselves the means. And that is what we are trying to do. In our approach, we have understood that everything starts with perception. Everything starts with the gaze. When you cannot change the partner's gaze upon yourself, you cannot modify the relationship. When you present yourself as a weak individual, you will be treated as such. When you present yourself as a weak country, you will be treated as such. So for us, it's about working first to change perceptions. And to change perceptions, we must find the elements that can convince others that the discourse we hold is not built on thin air. Look at the Sahel region. For a long time, it has been presented as a place of poverty, always associated with sad, negative images, to the point that we Sahelian people ourselves had internalized it and always began our speeches by presenting our problems. What we are trying to do today is to change the approach by saying it is clear that everyone has difficulties, but even some developed countries that come to our aid have difficulties. What we must do is more highlight the potential and the capacities that we have. That's how we can do good business with others. Because the marketing of misery might mobilize some resources, but it is never enough to launch a real development program. So working on the narrative that changes perceptions of our countries in order to work on real relationships. And today, you will notice that in Western discourse about Sahelian countries, more and more notions referring to the capacities of these countries are starting to appear. They say, yes, it's true that these are difficult areas. There are security, climate, and other challenges. But there are riches, and there is a youth that has long been presented as a problem. That too is another discourse that we must manage to change without any complex whatsoever. And this is the work we must do. And it's what the embassies are striving to do today. At the operational level, we have worked on instruments that allow each diplomatic mission and each actor to have a framework. The government works on the basis of performance contracts. We have duplicated this tool so that at the level of each diplomatic mission, each head of post can have a reference system that leads them to organize and target their interventions, to interest actors in subjects that are identified as strategic for the country. So I would say that the support for the realization of this vision involves precisely this work that we are doing. Today, we cannot go it alone. The diplomat cannot go and negotiate only for the financier to come later and try to find out what's happening. There must be coordination at the start of the chain, during the process, and at the end of the chain.
There you have it, a paradigm shift in the narrative as well as in the way of doing things. So, General, we are witnessing an upheaval of the order with the institutions born from the Second World War are being questioned, leading to a striking weakening of multilateralism. We are also witnessing blatant attempts to legitimize brute force as a mode of action on the international stage. Do these upheavals represent a threat or an opportunity for Burkina Faso, General?
Thank you very much. Indeed, for those who follow international current events, we are witnessing upheavals of all kinds, and especially the weakness of the institutions that were created, which were supposed to ensure that international relations across the world were balanced and that there was a kind of equity. Unfortunately, after the disappearance of the League of Nations after the First World War, which in fact experienced the same shortcomings that the UN is experiencing today, well, we are witnessing a diplomacy that is the diplomacy of force, where the strongest, well, crush the weakest. So we are dealing with international relations based on the capacity to defend oneself or the capacity to be offensive, the capacity to impose oneself through force. We do not see this as a threat. We see it much more as an opportunity. An opportunity through which countries that have long been considered countries of misery, poor countries, even though they abound with all the necessary resources coveted by the greatest powers, we must rely on this and the awakening of our populations, above all, to have a place in this society so that our voices can be heard, so that we can achieve true sovereignty and independence. Otherwise, we will continue to be prey that will be swallowed by the most voracious. This is precisely the reason why this important meeting was initiated and brought together, so that, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs has clearly stated, we can all speak with one unified voice. Each person in their own specific field of specialization, each individual in their particular area of competence and expertise. But we must all together see and pursue the same objective, which is to have a diplomacy that is brilliant, a diplomacy that is listened to, a diplomacy that can, in any case, make a place for itself, a good place in the concert of nations. And we are already there with the vision of the comrade president of Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, over the last 3 years. You will notice that Burkina Faso's voice carries through everything that has been done since. Not only the independent reconquest of our territory, it's not someone else who came to fight in our place. It's we ourselves who are fighting. The strengthening of our operational capacities. The capacity to ensure that food self-sufficiency becomes a reality. All these are factors that mean we are being listened to more and more. So this situation of upheaval in international relations across the world, where countries can go and remove heads of state from other countries, or deploying an armada to threaten some, we're going to work to ensure that this can't happen to us, because we must also assert ourselves. And we have the capacity. We are coveted today by many people who had rejected us. 3 years ago, many countries had turned their backs on us. Today, they're the ones running after us to try to establish a collaboration, because we have expertise whose experience they also wish to share.
So, Minister Nakanabo, in this context, how is Burkina Faso positioning itself to take advantage of the opportunities offered at the economic and financial level?
Thank you very much for your attention. I think that, especially in light of everything that has been said and discussed here today, it is quite clear that in the present day, geopolitics has a significant and far-reaching influence on all spheres and aspects of the global economy. In our world today, a single decision made somewhere by someone, sometimes even on a whim or without much consideration, can truly change everything, everywhere, all around the world. So you have to understand that, in fact, the economy is structured in such a way that its sensitivity to information is extremely strong. If you've noticed for quite some time now, we feel that there is a noticeable trend in the global economy to gradually distance itself from a certain established order, a pattern that has existed for many years. This ongoing shift is subtle but significant, and it is something that continues to shape the world economy in important ways. Today, the dollar, which is widely regarded as a very strong and stable currency and also serves as an important international currency, is gradually losing ground and influence, because there are now several new players and competitors appearing on the global financial scene. And people have started to understand that we shouldn't always think that we're going to rely on others to develop. And when you look at the trend today of many central banks in the world, it's to seek to build up gold reserves. And when people start building up gold reserves, it means there's concern, since gold is a safe haven. And this gold reserve, where does it come from? It comes from our countries. So in a way, it shows us that in reality, we have a strength that we don't imagine. Because also, well, the world is made such that for years we've been led to believe we have nothing, we're poor, we're miserable, we must always hold out our hand, we must be helped, and so on. And I think we've internalized that too, and it's a shame. Today, I believe that more and more people understand that in reality, salvation can only come from our internal capacities. In Burkina, at least over the last 3 years, I think we've also shown that we can count on ourselves to do many things. We just held a press conference on the Patriotic Support Fund. And in 3 years, we've mobilized nearly $1 billion, not to say nearly 500 billion CFA francs. And no partner, even the biggest ones, can give us that in 3 years. That means if we relied on them, it wasn't certain maybe today we wouldn't even exist anymore. Especially since these partners follow a logic where they say their resources cannot be used to buy weapons. Or they'll tell you, well, you can buy weapons, but not lethal weapons. While on the other side, you have people attacking you with every possible arsenal. So it shows us that in reality, we're in a situation where salvation can only come from ourselves. And we have the capacity. So we must organize, and we must also ensure that the people can understand the message, and that is important.
Do you feel today that the people have become aware of this state of affairs, of their power to help the government achieve its objectives today?
Well, it's important to note that it's not the government being helped, but the people helping themselves.
Yes, well...
Because that's the reality, you know. Today, I believe the people are starting to understand. Because we have other perspectives, you know. For a long time, we only had the same sources of information. And we were always told that in reality, we are nothing, we're worth nothing, that people must always come. But today, I believe the people have understood. And if we stay on this trend, at some point, I'm not sure that the others who started to withdraw won't come to negotiate to return, as the general said. Right, we have a partner who at one point decided to no longer support us. And then they started coming, and we told them, no, we don't need it anymore. They insist, we say, no, we don't need it anymore. Because in reality, they don't have much to give us. It's just because we were told that without them, we can't become anything. Today, we must manage to organize ourselves, to value our resources, and ensure that our voice can also count. And as I said, if we're economically strong and militarily strong, it's obvious that influence will follow. Because if we speak while there's nothing behind it, it's not certain that people will respect us. So to be respected, we must first work on developing ourselves. And I think we're really off to a very good start for that.
So, Minister of State, all diplomacy revolves around the defense of national interest in light of this context. We could imagine the sectors around which Burkina Faso's interests might revolve. In other words, are the country's interests known by the servants of the people supposed to defend the state?
Thank you very much. You know, the meeting that took place, these dialogue days, also aimed to ensure that diplomats, non-diplomats, but everyone who contributes to working outside Burkina and inside, for the influence of our country, could also study these issues. And so we expect that at the end of this panel, and following the work carried out since yesterday, concrete proposals can also be made, so that the elements you're talking about can be highlighted and made available to the people.
Minister of Foreign Affairs, does Burkinabe diplomacy have clear strategic orientations today for its global deployment and for its influence?
I think that everything we do is structured around the defense of Burkina Faso's interests. For us, it's first and foremost the national territory. And when we talk about national territory, we talk about the land, we talk about mineral resources, and we also talk about the use of the land and resources by the Burkinabe first, and the use of what is generated by those resources. So our work is oriented towards that goal, which is nothing other than the fulfillment of the Burkinabe through Burkina Faso's resources. So we are currently working to make sure that the state truly has the necessary capacity to effectively share the dividends, let's say the benefits of the resource. And when you look at the orientations of the revolution today, it's nothing other than that popular shareholding and everything that is an approach that opens up a certain access to the populations. It's a question of overall security. Because when you work to create too severe divisions between the strata of populations, you build pockets of frustration. And today, it's obvious that the security issue, has precisely taken on a serious turn because there were already pockets that facilitated recruitment. And that's part of the frustrations. It started in areas where there was a lot of frustration, where people felt abandoned. They felt like they were totally forgotten. So a good distribution of the fruits of growth so that the Burkinabe, wherever they are, feels that no matter the amount they receive, the central state is thinking of them. That leads them to defend the little pixel they are on. So the work we're doing isn't just a matter of physical construction, but we must even review the mentality and the way Burkinabe people look at themselves and their country to create and strengthen that national sentiment. So that as soon as an event occurs, wherever it is in Burkina Faso, all Burkinabe people feel it, whether in pain or in joy, but in any case, that there's this impression that wherever we are, including Burkinabe people abroad, they can work to protect their entity. Because these are our lands, it's where we live, and it's where future generations must also live.
Now, this also involves the fight against disinformation, which Burkina Faso is often a victim of. So in this context, what could be the role of diplomatic and consular missions throughout the world?
I must say that, honestly, they're already doing an absolutely excellent job, without a doubt, of correcting, of justice, of nuance, to provide accurate information about Burkina. And it's a massive task, because you just have to click on the web. Everything that comes up about Burkina, it's as if all the search engines were set up to spread the security issue. And because it's a task that's been going on for a long time, we must work so that the keywords, which are insecurity on the search engine, change and can present a new face. And this work, the diplomats and the diplomatic missions, they're already doing this information work. It's not enough, but it's already something. Through contacts that transform, through the meetings they participate in, but also through the dissemination of images. And I believe that it's fundamental. Mentioning this question, for me, that's one of the key points, actually. Because when you look at what's happening in Burkina and in the sub-region, in the 3 countries, we are truly in a kind of narrative conflict. And Burkina is a space where we are demonstrating that something is possible without the actors on whom we had become hyper-dependent. In a way, it's very dangerous for certain institutions that were profiting. And showing that it's possible shows that duplication is also possible. The Minister of Finance just mentioned it right now, that in Burkina Faso we can clear 300 and some kilometers of roads to build the highway. It's something we couldn't mention. Maybe the first person who said it without having seen it would certainly be labeled as not normal. Today, it's something that is being presented. $1 billion in 3 years is something we didn't even have the courage to think about because we were so used to the few millions given to us annually. And all of that fueled the media, social networks on the web, which means that today when you click, it's the names of countries that are always associated with poverty, unemployment, malnutrition, uncultivated land, and all sorts of problems. Everything has been concentrated in our countries. And we must, because no one else will do it. We are the ones who must work to reverse this trend. And that also involves permanent information. A moralization, a correction. We must not really get tired of always providing the correction when it's necessary. And the embassies, the consulates, the missions, they're already doing it. And I can tell you that it's a very difficult job because our own neighbors, when you look at it, we are neighbors to countries where many citizens, including those from the interior, often know the outside world better than their own country. When you take a Burkinabe, perhaps from the Mohun Loop, he's going to have a hard time explaining what's happening in the southwest. It starts right there, knowing one's country, to be able to narrate it better, to be able to speak better about it. So we ourselves must learn to set out again to rediscover our countries, to present them, and to show that we are a destination. Ultimately, in fact, I think that's what it's about, to take the opposite view of those who discourage people from coming to Burkina Faso. I've witnessed so many testimonies from people who finally arrived in Ouaga, whom I received in an audience, and who said to themselves, I was advised against coming here. And when I arrived, I asked myself the question, what is going on in this country? So there is truly a job to be done to restore the facts. We didn't say that we don't have difficulties, but it must be within the limits of the difficulties we have and not a label that discourages the investor, that dissuades tourists, and which ensures that the country cannot take $1 on the same terms as someone where security is no better than in our countries.
So, General, how is this new narrative felt in what you are doing in terms of the reconquest and the fight against insecurity in Burkina?
Thank you very much. You know, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs said so well, Burkina Faso has initiated a dynamic that is going to disrupt the old order. The old order, especially that reigned over our continent, the order that was imposed, the format that was made, and unfortunately, as many as we are, we have all been formatted. On our poverty, on our need to beg, we have been conditioned to take crumbs and to ensure that it is with these crumbs that we will develop. And for more than 60 years, we have not moved. So the dynamic...
Currently, we are showing the whole world that everything is possible. You just have to believe in it and work for it. And this doesn't necessarily please the imperialists who want to keep us in the state we were in, so they can continue to exploit us. Now, that being said, regarding the war against terrorism, well, imperialism doesn't want us to succeed either. Because succeeding in fighting terrorism, which, by the way, is an emanation of you-know-who, just as a geopolitical tool to rule as they please, to change paradigms as they wish. In any case, they don't look favorably upon our success. So they will use every means, and they are using them now to discourage us, to discourage our men fighting on the ground. You are witnessing all these sinister audios circulating on social media, completely fabricated, which, by the way, we urge people not to share. We ourselves don't even want them sent to us. Sometimes they are sent to us to see if they're true or not. We must now be at the level where we know what is or could be true and what comes from propaganda and disinformation. So all our successes, nobody talks about them. They only mention a few small things, and we are at war. When you're at war, you strike blows, and inevitably, from time to time, you take some. So that's all it is. The small blows we take are publicized, inflated, and amplified. And also, they use our numbers, they hack our phones to spread messages that we never sent. So all of that is the disinformation war. After trying several times to destabilize the country by all means, up to the last attempt which went as far as confrontation. After all that failed, now it's a communication war. There you go. First to make us fail. In our war, and especially to destabilize the country so that the current momentum dies out to avoid gaining followers. Because this will awaken the consciousness of the black people we are, the black people who have always been mistreated, called every name, and above all, exploited. It's not just at the African continental level. It goes beyond all the islands, all the populations, well, African, black people, and even those who aren't black but have always felt exploited. So we must be on our guard and truly be determined, because it's not a struggle that will be easy. They won't let us handle this with ease.
Mr. Minister of Economy, nation branding Burkina Faso will be an asset for you on the international stage. So if you had a recommendation to make to our diplomatic missions, what would that recommendation be?
Thank you very much. As the Minister of Foreign Affairs said, they're already doing good work that we must work to consolidate. It must be said that in reality, the issue of disinformation and even the negative perceptions one can have about a country can have a very significant impact on its economy, especially those perceptions. You have someone 10,000 kilometers away from Burkina sitting in their office, and who thinks they know the realities of Burkina and will determine the fate of Burkinabe on that basis. When you look at our central bank today, the BCEAO, it has one of the lowest key interest rates of the central banks in the sub-region. But when we go to the market, our interest rates are the highest rates. What explains that? It's simply the risk premium. Because people feel that in a certain country, there's so much risk that when they want to lend money, they must set a high rate. Because the higher the risk, the higher the rate must be. So as a result, these negative perceptions mean that we have a very high cost of debt. And while I was talking with a rating agency, I said, but you say that the risk is high in Burkina, the interest rate is higher than in some countries that don't experience insecurity. But on the market, when you look at which countries are in default, Burkina has never been in default. Over these 3 years, we've never defaulted once. We've always paid the debt on time. While there are countries with no problems that are well perceived and well rated, but are always in default. So in reality, these are false perceptions. And today, more and more, we are starting to see a decline in the interest rate curve. That means that more and more people are starting to understand, since the results speak for themselves. We have a growth rate of 6 to 6.3%, a negative inflation rate, a tax burden rate that's one of the best in the WAEMU, and in terms of collection, we've broken records. And so it shows that in reality, it's often just perceptions, but if we let perceptions continue, they'll tend to impose themselves as the truth. That's why diplomats must indeed be on the offensive to also provide the right information, because the narrative that always considers that because the country is at war, nothing is working, people are starving, and so on, that's not the reality. We're not even saying to necessarily give a glowing image. Let's just tell the truth. And that's what I like to tell partners. We don't want you to say positive things or whatever about us. That's not our problem. Just tell the truth. Say what you see on the ground. It's more than enough for people to understand that what comes from perceptions isn't true. And I think that diplomats have a very large role to play. And we truly believe that we're on the right track and that everyone will be able to play their part. Because ultimately, Diplomacy always opens doors, and defense will always protect the nation. And it's the economy that will fund sovereignty and make the state even stronger. Thank you.
In this role of diplomat, there are still some opinions that believe that diplomats in diplomatic missions and consular posts do not sufficiently defend our compatriots in difficulty and represent more of a burden than a solution for our country. So, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs, how do you respond to that opinion?
First, I would say that I can understand this opinion to the extent that one always opines within the limits of what one knows or what one doesn't know. But you truly have to actually be in an embassy or a consulate general, living closely with the staff, to really measure the sacrifice they make every single day to represent their country, defend interests, be present at all meetings, participate in all activities assigned to the embassy, whatever the situation. I have personally witnessed several cases where I was able to understand the full sacrifice. When you go to certain missions, there are colleagues who practically live at the office just so they don't miss segments of debate on issues that is for their country. And they try to ensure that the country is represented wherever possible, even when there aren't enough resources. So I would say that those who truly think that are certainly people who haven't lived in embassies to understand enough, and that's completely normal. It's completely normal because these colleagues, they live outside the country. They are there for very specific missions and they give their all every day to be able to produce results. And you just spoke about questions of perception. For countries that must change, making an effort to change paradigms is really not easy. It's not easy because fortunately now, with what's being done in Burkina Faso, we no longer have trouble saying where Burkina is located. I have many colleagues here who have done this exercise every day. When you say, in fact, in Burkina Faso, it's complicated. But for people to even know where you're from, there's work to be done. So it's small patches of victory like that which contribute to building a certain image to move precisely toward that positive perception that makes it so in real production relationships, the person in front of you changes their behavior. Because as long as that doesn't change, as the finance minister said, interest rates won't change, the rhetoric won't change, the volumes won't change. And that's why it's quite subtle work, because the benefit cannot always be evaluated in monetary terms and in quantitative terms. When you work on changing a country's image, it impacts the chain of results that isn't necessarily at the level of diplomatic missions. Because of their work, a partner may decide to come and invest and create 200, 500 jobs. This isn't a result directly attributable to a specific diplomatic mission, but it's due to the work, likely, of a team that tried to convince the investor to take the plunge, come to the country, and work to develop a value chain. So I'd say they generate huge benefits, except the evaluation is much more subtle. It's not always about money. It's assessed in terms of spin-offs and added value in various sectors. Perception is very difficult to evaluate in terms of quantity or percentage. We can only evaluate it by looking at the impact on either tourism flows or investment volume, or bank interest rates, or other parameters that aren't necessarily within the scope of embassy observation. So it's work that produces results. We must certainly refine our evaluation tools to show the contribution of diplomats in mobilizing or generating resources for the country.
So we're drawing to the end of this panel. Minister of Economy, after everything said here, what would you like us to take away from this panel?
Thank you very much. I'd like us to remember that diplomacy, defense, and the economy are interdependent. As I said, diplomacy opens doors because it's the work of diplomats that also changes partners' perceptions and attracts them to invest in the country. Of course, defense is to protect the nation. When the nation isn't protected, we can't do anything. And if all this is naturally combined, the economy can work to ensure development. Then I think it's important as has been said several times, that we always work together, ensuring that the synergies we develop in our activities can happen harmoniously. And that's how we'll qualitatively transform the conditions for the people of Burkina Faso.
So, Minister of State, your closing words?
My closing words are first to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs for organizing this activity in collaboration with Defense, Security, and Finance. And to hope that the bond created during these days can be sustained. People should be aware that when it comes to diplomacy, there is no reason to be afraid. Because there are some who have said, well, our diplomacy, we want to have a radiant diplomacy, we want to free ourselves a bit from the yoke of imperialism and all that. It is perfectly normal. If we do not do it because we are afraid, then we will remain small. Or quite simply, we will disappear. And nothing is done and nothing succeeds with ease. Fortune favors those who know how to take risks and who despise fear. So let us be confident in what we are doing. Let us be determined that we are here doing what must be done so that Burkinabe diplomacy shines throughout the world. And that even sometimes if we must be aggressive to get our ideas across, well, let us be so, because the others do it. Well, we are certainly not going to spare ourselves from that. So thank you to everyone, to all those who participated. Thank you to my fellow ministerial colleagues. And we hope that next year, or maybe in 2 years, we will repeat this activity again. I thank you.
Honor to whom honor is due, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs. The final word is yours.
Thank you. I really want to welcome the holding of this forum because we have wanted it for a long time. Because we were aware it is a bit like you do not play football with several balls on the field. We must work together as a team. We have converging objectives, all moving us towards the same goal. And for that, we need to take the time to learn more about each other, to evolve and grow together, and to make passes just like on a football field, defend our side, score goals, and ultimately win together. And in this, all the actors are important. So I would truly like to salute this spirit of openness from the Ministries of Finance, Defense, Security, which could not be here, and also the invaluable support of the elders who accompanied us. There are former diplomats here. They are resource persons we often turn to because we do not always understand everything. I must admit, it is a sector where even understanding the culture often leads you to talk with the elders to understand the nuances. When you go to a Gulf country or an Asian country, you have to talk with those who have that experience to give you some subtleties so that you can be accepted. So I would truly like to thank them and especially congratulate the Strategic Analysis Bureau, which worked in good synergy with the other actors, the CNES, with the National State Security Council, and all the actors who contributed to making this framework possible for the first time. And I think the results that emerged from this meeting suggest that we should maintain this momentum because we, as diplomats, need it, and I know that the other departments need it too.
Thank you, Minister. See you at the next edition. This concludes this high-level panel. Thank you to those who followed it. We say a big thank you to the Strategic Analysis Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which led these sessions. And we also say thank you to Wendata Natalie Kaure and all her teams from the Communication and Press Relations Directorate who managed the organization of this panel. See you very soon.
A big thank you indeed to RTV. We have recently had the privilege of attending a very high-level panel, brilliantly led by our ministers present here today. They honored this panel with the relevance of their analysis throughout the entire program. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please give them a big round of applause because they brilliantly succeeded with this high-level panel. This marks the end of these first days of dialogue on defense, security, diplomacy, and finance, characterized by rich exchanges, quality analysis, and convergence. We are now moving on to the closing session. This final sequence will focus on three major points. The reading of a motion of support for the Comrade President of FASO, a recommendation for synergy of action among the actors implementing Burkina Faso's foreign policy, and of course, the closing remarks from the Minister of State, present here, Minister of War and Patriotic Defense, representing His Excellence, the Prime Minister, Head of Government and Patron of the ceremony. Welcome then to this closing ceremony. And as announced for the highlights, we invite to this podium. First, the motion of support for the Comrade President of FASO, which will be read by Colonel Tankwano Victor.
Motion of support for the Comrade President of FASO. Given the national context, given the profound changes, strategic ruptures, and geopolitical upheavals characterizing the sub-regional, regional, and international context, considering the very high strategic orientations of the Comrade President of FASO. In connection with the foreign policy of Burkina Faso, recognizing the significant importance of synergies for the effective optimization of the defense, the promotion, and the comprehensive protection of the interests of Burkina Faso and its nationals throughout the world, we, participants in the first days of dialogue on defense, security, finance, and diplomacy, held on the 17th and 18th of February 2026 in Ouagadougou, reiterate on one hand our firm support for the Comrade President of FASO in his determined efforts to reconquer and fully restore the integrity and unity of the national territory, as well as in his foreign policy of decisive rupture and comprehensive rehabilitation of the sovereignty of Burkina Faso. He has demonstrated strong leadership. And on the other hand, we reaffirm our full and unwavering commitment to implement in a coordinated and synergistic manner all necessary measures to achieve these important objectives. The foreign policy for the benefit of the interests of Burkina Faso, in accordance with the ideals of the Popular Progressive Revolution. Done in Ouagadougou on the 18th of February, 2026. The participants.
We say thank you to Colonel Victor Tankwano for this motion of support for the Comrade President of FASO. Let us now come to the recommendation precisely for a synergy of action between actors in the implementation of Burkina Faso's foreign policy. And to read this motion precisely, we invite to this podium. Here is the Director of International Organizations of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Recommendation for a synergy of action between actors responsible for the implementation of Burkina Faso's foreign policy. Considering the profound changes, ruptures, and upheavals that characterize the sub-regional, regional, and international context, taking into account the dynamics of sub-regional groupings in light of the geopolitical context of West Africa and the Sahel, taking into account the main orientations and guiding principles of the foreign policy as defined and set forth by Comrade Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who is the President of FASO and also serves as the head of state. Being aware of the key roles played by important actors in defense, security, finance, and diplomacy in the effective implementation of Burkina Faso's foreign policy. Being concerned about the ongoing need for greater synergy of action with a view to further optimizing and robustly enhancing the defense and protection of our national interests remains a key priority. Resolved to strengthen coordination between the actors concerned for a more coherent and effective implementation of foreign policy. We participants in the first days of dialogue on defense, security, finance, and diplomacy, held on February 17th and 18th, 2026 in Ouagadougou, recommend the institutionalization of the Defense, Security, Finance, and Diplomacy Dialogue Days to foster strong, coherent, and uninhibited diplomatic action. The establishment of a harmonized training framework for individuals appointed to diplomatic missions and consular posts of Burkina Faso abroad. the implementation of a cooperation program between the major training schools of the various ministerial departments involved, done in Ouagadougou on February 18, 2026. The participants, I thank you.
We would like to say a heartfelt and sincere thank you to Mrs. Ines Bakio for this recommendation following these days, these very first days. And of course, the closing remarks go to the Minister of State, Minister of War and Patriotic Defense, representing His Excellence the Prime Minister, Head of Government, patron of the ceremony. Minister of State, please, for the closing remarks.
Your Excellency, the esteemed Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Minister of Economy and Finance, the respected Minister Delegate to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, distinguished and honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to address you all today. Comrades of the government, comrade guests, dear participants, at the end of these two intense, demanding, and fruitful days, I fully appreciate the scope of what we have just accomplished. We are not simply closing a session. We are, in fact, closing one important stage in order to open another, one that is even more structural, more decisive for the future of our nation. These days have been a moment of collective lucidity, a moment of strategic truth, a moment of institutional commitment. And I wish, on behalf of the government, and particularly the Comrade Prime Minister, to salute your high sense of statehood, your intellectual discipline, and your commitment to the superior interests of Burkina Faso. During these two very meaningful days, we thoroughly compared our analyses, generously shared our expertise, carefully harmonized our visions, and above all, laid the solid foundations for a principle that is now truly irreversible. The defense of Burkina Faso's interests must be integrated, coordinated, and strategic. We have understood with even greater clarity that contemporary geopolitics leaves no room for improvisation. The world is reconfiguring, alliances are being redrawn, and power dynamics are intensifying. In this context, a state that acts in a silo weakens, while a state that coordinates its forces grows stronger. And Burkina Faso has chosen to strengthen itself. These days have allowed us to deepen our common understanding of geopolitical, regional, and international changes. They have allowed us to further align our instruments. Defense to protect, security to stabilize, finance to support, and diplomacy to project. Because it must be said with gravity, sovereignty is not proclaimed. It is organized, it is structured, and it is defended. The high-level panel we just held was one of the highlights of this meeting. We shared a clear vision there, one of a combat diplomacy, a coherent diplomacy, a results-oriented diplomacy. A diplomacy that doesn't seek image for image's sake, but produces concrete gains for the people of Burkina Faso. A diplomacy that places the fundamental interests of Burkina Faso above all secondary considerations. And I have, along with my colleagues, called on our staff to cultivate a renewed team spirit, where each institution becomes a power multiplier for the other. The recommendations made during this work will not remain a dead letter. They will be examined with vigor, prioritized with method, and translated into actions with determination. Because the superior interest of Burkina Faso suffers neither from slowness nor from dispersion. It demands coherence, discipline, and efficiency. I would like to pay a strong tribute to the Comrade President of Faso, His Excellency Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Under his leadership, our diplomacy is undergoing a major strategic repositioning. Under his vision, Burkina Faso assumes its sovereignty with dignity. Under his impulse, our country no longer endures history, it contributes to writing it. My thanks also go to the Comrade Prime Minister, His Excellency Apollinaire Joachim Kilem de Tambela, for his commitment and support in organizing these days. I also salute the Comrade President of the National State Security Council, my colleagues in charge of Foreign Affairs, Finance, and Security, as well as the Director General of the National Center for Strategic Studies. Your collective commitment has allowed for the establishment of a new dynamic, a dynamic that must not stop here. Finally, I wish to extend my warm and sincere congratulations to all the experts from our various structures, who, for several months, have worked with consistency, rigor, and discretion to prepare these days. Their professionalism, high sense of state, and unwavering dedication were decisive in the success of this strategic initiative. May they find here the expression of the nation's well-deserved gratitude. Dear participants, what we have initiated goes beyond the scope of these 2 days. We have launched a new culture, the culture of permanent consultation, the culture of strategic coordination, and the culture of institutional unity. For history teaches us a simple lesson. The nations that survive are those that know how to unite their forces around their fundamental interests. Burkina Faso will survive. Burkina Faso will grow stronger. Burkina Faso will prevail. Not by chance, but through organization, discipline, and unity. I urge you to maintain the spirit of these days, to turn this synergy into a reflex, to make strategic coherence a working method, and to make institutional unity a doctrine. History offers us a rare opportunity. It is up to us to seize it, up to us to structure it. Finally, I would like to thank you all for your active commitment and your high sense of national responsibility. May the spirit of these days lastingly inform our actions. May coherence guide our decisions, and may sovereignty inspire each of our acts. Fatherland or death, we shall overcome. Thank you for your kind attention.
We say a big thank you to the Minister of State, Minister of Defense, and of Patriotic Defense.